Welcome to The Voices of War, a podcast with a simple vision to bring to life the true costs of war through the voices of those who've lived it. I'm Maz, and I speak to soldiers, academics, refugees, peacemakers, and anyone else who's been touched by war in the hope of demystifying and, most importantly, de-glorifying it. If you like what you hear, please consider showing your support by reviewing the show wherever you get your pods. You can also support us on our Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee page. Links to both are in the show notes. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy this episode. My guest today is Marc Garlasco, who is the military advisor at PAX, the largest peace organization in the Netherlands that works to protect civilians against acts of war, to end armed violence, and to build inclusive peace. Marc has split his long career between the military and human rights spheres, where he has strived to bridge the gap between the two communities. He began his career as the chief of high-value targeting at the Pentagon between 1997 and 2003, where he led targeting teams during operations Iraqi Freedom, Desert Fox, and Allied Force. Marc later worked in senior roles at Human Rights Watch, the United Nations, and the Center for Naval Analyses. Throughout his time, he has worked in Afghanistan, Gaza, Georgia, Iraq, Israel, Kosovo, Lebanon, Libya, and other conflict zones. He's a co-author of the ICRC report on explosive weapons in populated areas. And since the middle of last year, Marc is also a co-host of the excellent The Civilian Protection podcast that tells the story of those harmed by war, but whose voices are rarely heard. Marc joins me today to speak about the targeting process, harm to civilians, and unseen costs of war. Marc, thank you very much for joining me on The Voices of War.
Hey, it's my pleasure, Maz. Thanks for having me.
So I'm speaking to another podcaster, which is an interesting experience for me. So don't hold any faux pas against me. But before we get into your extensive career and some of the experiences you've had, maybe we can start with how you firstly got into the Pentagon and why targeting. How did the life lead you down that path?
Yeah, I just kind of fell into it, to be honest with you. I was in graduate school getting my master's degree at the Elliott School of International Affairs at GW in Washington, D.C. And one of the fellows who was a year ahead of me, a friend of mine, he was working in the Pentagon at the Defense Intelligence Agency. And, one of the things you're doing when you're in university, you're looking for a job, right?
Yeah.
And so, we got to chatting and he said, we're going to be doing a big hiring push. And so I said, hey, here's my resume. And I threw my resume in the hat, and lo and behold, they gave me a ring, and I went in and had the interview and absolutely crashed and burned and walked away without a job. Right. But then got a ring from another division and went in, and I hit that one out of the park, did quite well, and I got the job. I have to say, though, I started out in something that I really had no business being in. I began working in information operations. Right. And a lot of computer network attack, computer network defense, and that's really not my forte. And so after about a year, I transitioned and started working in more of a leadership analysis role. Got into doing leadership analysis at Defense Intelligence Agency, which is right across the river from the Pentagon. And just, so everyone knows the way that the U.S. intelligence community works, the Defense Intelligence Agency is basically the intelligence for the military, for the Pentagon, national level. Whereas the Central Intelligence Agency provides intelligence to, civilian leadership like the president. Right. The DIA does that for the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the military and whatnot. Right. And so the DIA is headquartered in the Pentagon, but there's not enough space there. It's a mighty big building. Yeah. But the intel folks, most of them are across the river in Bolling Air Force Base. And so I started working there on leadership, and I just kind of lucked into some hot accounts. I started working leadership on Serbia
Right.
And
Okay.
I started working leadership on Serbia, and that's when Allied Force started.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did targeting, battle damages. I was on the battle damage assessment team, and I did targeting for the conflict against Serbia, and then actually went to Kosovo after the war. Really, right after it was finished, it was August of '99, and that was my first experience on the ground, seeing what happens, what the reality of war is, and going there and conducting a battle damage assessment.
Wow.
And then I transitioned to the Iraq account.
Sorry, just before I have to, as a ethnic Bosnian, somebody who's been directly impacted by the Balkan wars. When you say leadership of Serbia, you were as in, what does that mean for the uneducated audience? What do you mean when you were doing analysis of leadership?
Yeah, so when you're doing that, you're basically trying to find, fix, locate, and determine where important individuals in a country's leadership are going to be. Mm-hmm. Should National Command Authority decide to target them during a conflict. And so
we talk people like Milosevic in this case.
Exactly, yeah. We're talking Slobodan Milosevic. We're talking about the security forces that kept him in power. Mm-hmm. And the telecommunications infrastructure that he communicated through, and also a number of the leaders in the Serbian intelligence forces, military forces, etc. And so that was basically what I did for Allied Force.
Wow, that's incredible. And then of course, as part of the bombing campaign, I guess in that instance, you weren't part of the targeting team. You were part of the analysis that was feeding information into the targeting. Is that how that would have worked?
Yeah. So we were making target recommendations.
Right.
We were providing recommendations to EUCOM, which is European Command, which was actually conducting the conflict. Mm-hmm. And so everything from telecommunications. So for example, if we got a request that said, okay, we want to stop Milosevic from speaking to his, military forces in this area, how do we do it? And the reply would be something like, okay, well, you want to take down these 10 telecom towers simultaneously, and, et cetera. And then you work with the weaponeers to try to determine what the proper munitions are for it. And then you work through the collateral damage assessment, et cetera. And, you work very closely with the targeting individual. So, that's really what that was. And then I was on the battle damage assessment team, and then I went to Kosovo and actually went on the ground. And it was quite amazing to me, because this really, I guess, it set my career up for the future. Because, I had my list of targets, and we were going site to site, and, you have your GPS coordinates. This is what the target was. This was the munition. And we would get to a site, conduct some interviews, look through the area, see if the weapon had functioned properly. Was the function of the facility destroyed, partially destroyed, et cetera. And I asked my boss, I said, so where do we put the civcats? Where do we put the civilians? And he said, well, we don't do that. We don't do body counts. And so I thought that was part of the deal. I thought that was part of the whole equation. And I was quite surprised, because I thought, hey, if we do these different analysis and say, okay, X number of civilians are going to be killed in a strike, does anyone ever go and check to see if those many civilians were killed? Because if there's a lot fewer, you should be, you could maybe use bigger bombs or more bombs, or, be more destructive. But if there are more civilians killed, maybe you need to take more precautions, and maybe we need to learn some things. And so that really kind of set me up where I started to think about things like that.
Why did we not have, and I'm going to include Australia here as well, I guess, because NATO, maybe writ large, and NATO partners. Why was this not part of the calculation at that point in time?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, looking back, I've never really gotten a really good answer to it. I can tell you, now they certainly do it not very well. And I can talk to a lot of the details of that. But it really kind of set things up as I moved to the Iraq account. Because now we're talking, as the U.S. was continuing, to fight Iraq. Let's not forget at that time you had what was known as ONW and OSW, Operation Northern Watch and Southern Watch, and a lot of people don't think about it, but Iraq was being bombed by the U.S. fairly regularly, in the north and in the south prior to the 2003 war. And these were regular operations that were ongoing.
Maybe just touch on that, because I can't say I'm familiar with that myself, and so I'd imagine many people wouldn't be.
Yeah. So when the war in Iraq, when the Gulf War was completed, Saddam was basically given, I guess I would say, the ability writ large to operate within the center of the country. But then in the north, where the Kurds were, and then in the south, where you had, a Shia minority, there was basically an umbrella of U.S. air power placed over those areas. And a lot of the targeting that occurred was telecommunications facilities, things of that nature. Some air defense was regularly hit. And so, there was Operation Northern Watch and Southern Watch was this continuing bombing campaign of Iraq, very low scale, but still significant.
And still against Saddam and his forces, obviously, to keep him at bay to the north and south, obviously,
That's right, Okay. Should he, ever decide to again, go forth and do evil things. But at that time, I really had completely transitioned over to the Iraq account, and we had Desert Fox, which was basically a kind of like a weekend thing around Thanksgiving in the States, which was part of the whole wag the dog issue with President Clinton and his issues with Monica Lewinsky, where he decided to go and bomb Iraq for a weekend. And I really began with that conflict to start working on better understanding Saddam Hussein, his security apparatus, the facilities, etc. And starting then, and my boss at the time, he left, and so I was promoted into, very, very luckily, I guess, I got into a hot account.
And the account, I guess, at that time, right?
At that time,
it really wasn't anything else.
And then I moved over to the Pentagon and worked on the Joint Staff. And at that time, I was going around as necessary, flying around the world when CIA would bring defectors out, and I would go and interview defectors and develop what we called, it's a silly name, we called target jackets. But you basically have your targeting matrix of the building, what there is, what it's constructed of, who's there when, what types of munitions are most likely going to be used against it or are recommended, and just basically preparing for a war that I honestly never thought was going to happen.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, but I was going around and interviewing folks and trying to understand Saddam Hussein, the Special Security Organization, which was, his highest leadership security folks, just the real knuckle dragger bad guys that you don't want to get involved with. His son, Saddam's son, was actually in charge of those. Right. The Iraqi Intelligence Service was on my list. The Ba'ath Party, various government entities. And so, I went around meeting with a lot of folks and developing this. And then as, post 9/11, I was in the Pentagon on 9/11. And then immediately after 9/11, I was called into my boss's office on the Joint Staff. And he said to me, okay, I need you to go and sit down and meet with the main analyst for for counterterrorism. So, my boss called me into the office and he said, I want you to meet with the counterterrorism head, and I need you to put together a paper with her on what the linkage is between Saddam Hussein and 9/11.
And Al-Qaeda, yeah.
And I'm just looking at him going, okay, I'm done. There's no link. And he's like, no, you really need to actually go and do research. And I explained, I'm like, listen, I've been following Saddam Hussein now for a number of years. I can tell you where he's been, at any moment. Predicting where he's going to be is a little harder. But that's really not what you're going to do in intel. But I could tell you a whole lot about him. And there's not only is there no relationship to Al Qaeda, but they did not see eye to eye, let's say. And I went and met with her. We spent about a week on it. We put together a white paper, and it never went anywhere. And the next thing I know, things start moving. Obviously, the conflict in Afghanistan was rolling. Yeah. And then there was this real big push for Iraq. And I was called in to brief Wolfowitz and Cheney and Rumsfeld and, provide information on Saddam and the leadership and whatnot and targeting issues. And it just became very, very clear to me that we were heading to war.
How do you feel? I mean, even back then, I guess you made it quite clear that, there's no links. Now, 20 years later, we can comfortably say that it was all a farce, really. How did you feel back then, and how do you feel now about that? I mean, it's that you were briefing some senior leaders. I guess you could read between the lines even back then. How did that sit with you?
I left for Human Rights Watch.
Right.
I mean, so how did I deal with it? In 2002, we were conducting the targeting. Hold
on, this is pre-invasion, though, right?
Yeah. So let me just set the scene for you.
Please.
So there's deliberate targeting and there's dynamic targeting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and deliberate targeting is when you take time to put together a prioritized list of targets to meet a commander's intent, and those targets will be attacked off of a joint target list in a phased conflict. In certain times for certain effects. And when I mean that, you may need to drop a certain building before another because it has a certain telecommunications part to it that you need taken out first, or there's an individual that you need to have killed at a certain time. So that's,
and when you say phases of war, when you say phases of war, as in with the actual advancing army, you might do, or military, you might do various attacks throughout those various phases, whether it's the, preliminary phase when you're kind of setting the scene, you might target particular things. And then as the troops are on the ground, you might target different things, again, in support of, as you said, the commander's intent to achieve an effect on the ground to support the ultimate invasion that was going on, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's precisely what we were doing. And in 2002, we were putting together that initial target list we were racking and stacking targets, saying, okay, when the bubble goes off, these are, I don't know, out of the first, few dozen targets, the vast majority of them were on my list because it was, other than, clearly air defense is going to go down and you're going to hit different radar installations and whatnot. But key leadership targets were right at the top of the list. And so we were doing deliberate targeting. We actually went to Shaw Air Force Base, which is in South Carolina in the US, and sat down, and you had DOD, so you had DIA people, you had CIA, you had National Security Agency, you had UK, you had US Air Force, Navy. So, I mean, just everybody. It was a huge mass. And you're going through the target list, and they would put up, an image of the target, and we would have the DIMPs, which is desired mean point of impact, which is the little X's on the target, which is where you want the bombs to go, right? The desired mean point of impact. And we worked through the deliberate targeting. And when we had completed the deliberate targeting in 2002, we had approximately 300 targets that were considered to be high collateral damage targets. And at that time, high collateral damage was 30 civilians or more. So for that, things have changed. Things have definitely changed, and I can speak to that. But at the time, high collateral was considered to be 30 civilians or more. And for every target that we had over 30 civilians or more, we had to go to National Command Authority for their authorization. So that means either President Bush or Secretary Rumsfeld had to personally sign off on that. And there is no way we were going to send them 300 targets. No way. So we worked with the weaponeers, which are the people that determine the proper munition and munition settings for the weapon. We changed certain parameters like time of day. If you drop a bomb at night, you're less likely to kill civilians. We changed angle of attack because the angle of attack can be very important, because when the weapon impacts, the debris from the weapon is going to flow in a certain direction, and that can have a great impact on civilian harm. So, for example, there was one target that we struck that was across the street from a maternity hospital,
right?
And we hit it with about 18,000 pounds of high explosives.
Wow!
And no one in the hospital.
That's a number of bombs, right?
It was 9 2,000-pound bombs.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It was nine 2,000-pound bombs. Yep.
Yeah.
So, we went through all of that, but that's the deliberate targeting phase. So then the war kicks off, and I was not in support of it, to say the least. I remember on the eve of the conflict, I spoke to my colleague at CIA, who was the main leadership targeting person there, and led their high value targeting team, and said, as a matter of fact, you know what? I believe it was she said to me, "We're about to do this, and I can't believe it." And I said to her, "I don't know why." And we just had this conversation about just how absolutely unnecessary that this whole conflict was. And at any rate,
that's incredible.
Yeah. No, I mean, even on the inside, there were just massive concerns and questions. But the policymakers made their decision, and you move forward. But I could not support the conflict. I did not support the war in Iraq, and I was very interested in getting out and finding another job. And I was very lucky to be hired by Human Rights Watch. But the hiring process took quite a long time, and they dragged their feet on it. And they ended up offering me the position, as the war was kicking off. And I said to them, I'm really sorry. If you want me, I want to come. I want to work for you, but you're going to have to wait until at least the main combat operations are completed, because I felt like I had a responsibility to the civilians on the ground, to the pilots who are going to fly the missions, because if you're going to call restrikes in, you're putting someone's life at risk. And I understood that, and look, maybe there's some hubris involved, sure, but I felt that they're just going to pull some, warm body in. That's what the military does, right?
Yeah.
You've got somebody, you need somebody leaves, we're just going to throw some warm body in, and they're going to run it. Well, I felt like, look, nobody knows this target set like I do, and I'm going to fight for and fight against certain targets. And I thought back to Radio Television Srpska. Back when that was struck, I was actually part of the targeting team that argued against it. And we initially had it removed from the target list. And this was during the war in Kosovo in 99. Yeah. And so my team argued against it. We presented our arguments to European Command, and they removed it from the target list. It was a television station, it was civilian in nature. EUCOM was very concerned with propaganda. But, we went to them, we worked with the lawyers, and there were a number of lawyers that were concerned that this was not a lawful target because it's civilian in nature. But some obviously supported it. So we went in a different way. And we explained that, listen, if you take RTS down, they're just going to reconstitute their capabilities within about 72 hours. And I was quite amazed. We were wrong. They reconstituted in about 8 hours. And, RTS was hit about a week after we had it taken off the target list. And so it was one of those things where, you do the best you can. And so that was my thinking going into the Iraq conflict. I want to be there because I'm going to fight for some of these targets and fight against others. And you need to have, that dissenting voice in. And so I stayed there up until after the Saddam statue fell. And we were working, incredibly long hours. We had cots in the building, sleeping in the Pentagon, and folks sleeping at CIA and NSA and whatnot, and making target recommendations. And I changed. Well, actually, it's quite interesting. The shift from deliberate targeting to dynamic targeting. So dynamic targeting, now this is the phase where things are moving quickly. And yes, you may have your deliberate target, let's say some intelligence center or, Saddam's palace. But once the bubble goes up, those people all move somewhere.
Yeah.
And so they become dynamic targets because they're mobile. And so you're tracking them live, and you're trying to find them and engage them. And I remember I was my daughter Emily was born the week before the war, and I was home. I told my boss, I said, "Listen, I got to take some paternity leave," and he thought I was absolutely nuts. And I said to him, "Listen, it's fine. The war is not scheduled until Saturday, so let me take the week. I'll come in on Friday night. We'll be ready to go." That
sentence, "the war is not scheduled till Saturday," it's just, it's just incredible.
And it bit me in the ass, because then I got a phone call. I think it was a Wednesday when the war started. I got a call. I'm sure somebody will fact check me. I think it was a Wednesday. I got a phone call, and it was my boss, and he just says, "Come in right now." And just, I was frozen. I thought, oh crap.
Right.
And, I went to my wife. I said, "I have to go into the Pentagon right now." And she just looked at me. She said, "The war is starting." I said, "Don't say anything to anyone."
Yeah.
And I got in my car, and I'm driving to the Pentagon up the George Washington Parkway. And as I'm going, I'm listening to the radio. And at one point they break in, they go, "Special news bulletin, war in Iraq." And they start describing this attack. And I'm like, holy shit, what are we bombing? I know all the targets. What are we bombing? And I'm listening, and I'm thinking, that sounds just like the Judea Peninsula, which is just south of the presidential palace. And I'm going through my head, like going through all the targets on Judea Peninsula. I'm like, why would we hit Judea Peninsula? I'm like, Saddam's kids' palaces are there, and they have a family compound. And I'm thinking, why would we hit this? And then they're talking about, there was Saddam was targeted, and there was a bunker. And I'm thinking to myself, there's no bunker. So I get into the Pentagon, and I rushed down I was working in the NMJIC, which is the National Military Joint Intelligence Center. So the way it works is, the 2 is the intel side, and the 3 is the operational side. And the 2 is the NMJIC is right next to the tank, which is what the nickname for the 3 was, for the operations guys. Right. And I went into the 2, which was just like buried in the building, where it's air gapped because of all the intelligence stuff that you've got and whatnot, and we're underground. And I go down and I go into my boss. I'm like, "What did we hit?" And he said, we hit Dora Farm. And that changed the war for me, because now all of a sudden I had to remove a number of targets off of the JTL, which is a joint target list, because if Saddam is dead, you don't want to hit.
The war is different.
The war is completely different. There are buildings that if you take them down, you're just going to have to rebuild them. So the war changed dramatically. And at that point, I switched completely to dynamic targeting, and we were going after Saddam Hussein. And so my group, the high value targeting cell, there was the high value targeting cell in the Pentagon. You had one at NSA, one at CIA, and one at CENTCOM Forward, which was in Doha. And they were actually the decision makers. We were providing targeting recommendations. And we were doing VTCs at the time, video teleconferences, 2-a-days, and on the phone all the time, and looking at satellite imagery and Blue Force Tracker, which tells you where forces are, and trying to, obviously listen into comms from the enemy and whatnot, and try to understand where Saddam was. And we ended up taking 50 shots at Saddam Hussein.
Wow.
From the time, from Dora Farm up until, it was about, I don't know, was it like April 7th, something like that? And so a fairly short time period. We took 50 shots at him. And we only killed civilians.
Oh,
so not there was not a single target was killed that we were trying to hit. And I'm looking at the famous deck of cards, right, which has Saddam and his sons and all these other people on it. And every day I'm getting up 4 a.m. in the building to go in and brief the two, which is the general who's in charge of intel, who's then going to go in and brief Rumsfeld. And every day he's asking me, did you get anybody on the blacklist? Because that's what we called it, the blacklist. And the leadership for Iraq. And it was something like the second weekend we finally had somebody, and he was so down the totem pole. And it was actually the Marines who killed him, or the Army who killed him in some armored pitched battle, and we had nothing to do with it. And at any rate, it was a real lesson in this targeting from afar and thinking that you have all of the answers, and in fact you have very few answers, and if any at all. And I then transitioned once the statue fell. I went in the next day. I planned my last bombing mission, made target recommendations, worked with the weaponeers, and the next day I flew to New York. Went to Human Rights Watch. They put me on a plane to Kuwait. I got to Kuwait, met my new colleagues, and got into a car and drove into Iraq. And a couple days later, I kid you not, I was standing in a crater that I had helped plan, and I was talking to the sole survivor of 2 families, about 19 people killed.
Non-combatants, civilians.
Yeah, it was a doctor.
And you had been in charge of that operation. Weeks before? I had been on the providing the target pack.
I had been providing target recommendations for it, and at the time it looked good. The intel looked good, and I actually remember I watched the actual strike. It was in Basra, which was UK territory. It was in Basra, and we were attacking Chemical Ali, who was, Saddam's cousin, and look, no doubt, war criminal. He had been in charge of gassing the Kurds back in 1988 in the Anfal campaign, had a lot of blood on his hands, and we thought that he was there, and he wasn't. And a number of and the fellow who survived is this old man, maybe in his 70s. And I remember when I was speaking to him, I just couldn't stop looking at his hands because they were just gnarled, and his fingernails were worn down and bloodied. And I mean, this is a week later. And he had been digging out the body of his son and his grandchildren, and it was utterly heartbreaking.
I can't even imagine what. I mean, obviously, the sheer horror that he has experienced as somebody who's innocent. That's just the words can't just imagine what he has felt when his entire family, you said, was basically deleted. Of this. We will touch on that, because those kind of the impact of the bombs are definitely something I'd really like to touch on. But just before we get to that, something that just doesn't that I've been wanting to understand for years now, as a member of the military myself, and somebody who has had some cursory exposure to the targeting process, at least in the support to the intelligence piece, as a collector. 50 attempts at one target, 0 out of 50 success. I mean, that's an incredibly poor strike rate. How does the targeting process work, and what contributed to such a abysmal picture, really, of 0 out of 50? How do we get to that? Given everything the might of the, and in this case, particularly the US military. Now, of course, Australia kind of, we rode your coattails of many of these things. But how does that happen?
So I want to look at it not as the attacks on Saddam, But let's look at targeting of leadership just writ large. Okay, we started off talking about Slobodan Milosevic. The U.S. NATO bombed his home, and for all the U.S. politicians saying, "Oh, we're just hitting a building, we're not trying to kill him," that's nonsense, right? We're trying to kill him. We went after Osama bin Laden how many times with drones and
for how many years,
whatnot, for how many years, right? And couldn't do it. We went into Iraq. We took the country over and we still couldn't find these fellows and we still were bombing them. We're in Afghanistan for how many years going after, Mullah Omar, and, the number 2 of Al-Qaeda was killed every other week. Yeah. And, you look at what's gone on in Syria, some of the targeting problems that have happened there. And I think it goes to show that there are some systemic problems within the targeting cycle that really need to be addressed. And it's something that we at PAX and a lot of other NGOs are working very closely right now with the US Pentagon and with some of the NATO allies to try to address, as I think they recognize, particularly post the Kabul airstrike, where, the US, the final, day, the final strike was, 10 civilians were killed and they were completely not involved. And the US comes out with this nonsensical statement that it was a righteous strike. And I think it goes to show the basic difficulty of hunting human beings from 30,000 feet. And you really do not have a conception of what's going on the ground. And the lack of post-strike investigation and how that feeds into this, self-licking ice cream cone where you think what's going on, you set up a target package, you go in, you prosecute the target, you drop a weapon, you kill them, and you don't actually kill the person or whatever it is that you're aiming for, and you just do it again, and there's never trying to learn from it or what did we go wrong, let's do an investigation into the civilian harm aspect. And so it just keeps eating up on itself. And another thing too is, I'm guilty as anybody else. I'm sitting here listening to the language that I'm using. We're talking about prosecuting a target. We're talking about, targeting something. You talk about collateral damage. These are human beings. They're not collateral damage. Yeah. And so a lot of the language built around all of this really reinforces a number of the systemic problems that exist in targeting. And it creates a system in which you really have confirmation bias. And I think that's one of the big problems, is that you're looking for a target. And so you're going to find a target. If it's very cliche, but if every problem is a nail, you're going to bring out the hammer. And I think that it's really past time for us to make some changes.
Yeah, I can certainly agree with that, just from my own experiences as well. It's when you're part of the military machine, it's very difficult. You're part of a tribe that is, carrying a flag, and it's fighting a righteous war, and you're doing your best. And the motivations, they can slip somewhat, because you've got objectives to achieve. You've got, you've got specific missions, despite the fact that those missions might actually be very murky and uncertain, as we well know with Curveball, the intelligence that ultimately shaped that entire conflict in Iraq. The irony of the code name of the source, and I suspect a lot of the.
I know Curveball very well.
Okay, maybe tell us a little bit about your experience, because that's
I really can't get into it.
Right,
Curveball was a source that informed a lot of the U.S. decision making and targeting. And let's just say that in the beginning of the Iraq conflict, Ahmed Chalabi, who was the individual running the Iraqi National Congress, which was kind of this dissident group fighting, supposedly fighting against Saddam. And really using his connections with the U.S. government to push forward his agenda and to really push the war forward. They were feeding the U.S. intelligence community and policymakers what folks wanted to hear.
Yeah.
And I think that informed an awful lot of not only the targets, but the decision making. And it's very unfortunate. And it led into a lot of the things that Colin Powell said at the UN when he was making his pitched plea to the world. Here is the intelligence. Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. This is how we know. And I can't, I'm watching this and I'm sitting in the Pentagon, and I'm looking at my friends who work the WMD cell, and I'm like, do you guys really have this? And they're like, well, I don't know what the hell he's talking about.
Wow.
So there's an awful lot of disconnect, and there's also an awful lot of, well, he must know something we don't know. Because even in the intelligence community,
maybe it's a different compartment or whatever.
There's compartments, right? Things are compartmentalized. I mean, I had a TSSCI, which is top secret sensitive compartmentalized information. And it means that if I don't need to know, I'm not going to find out. And if somebody else doesn't need to know something that I have, they're not going to find out. And so you're sitting there thinking, wow, well, okay, these are, the president, the vice president, secretary of state, you name it, Tenet. I briefed Tenet. I can't tell you how many times I briefed Tenet.
Wow.
And you think, well, he's got to know something I don't know, because, he's the director of Central Intelligence.
Right? That's
he's
right.
Tenet.
Yeah.
So, I'm a nobody. I'm an analyst, right?
Yeah. That's just, I can't just stop shaking my head at that, because, the consequences of those decisions are so grave, and it seems as though they were made in absence of credible information. And those who made them obviously must have known that the information wasn't credible, because I find it hard to believe that the entire machinery, and like you're saying, even the actual WMD people responsible to provide the intelligence on those very weapons had no idea what's going on. Is this a question of poor incentives? What was, now looking back years, what do you put it down to? What was the motivation behind the war in Iraq, and how did these poor incentives shape and influence the actual war?
Well, I believe that the U.S. government at the time had already made a decision that they were going to, remove Saddam Hussein. There was going to be a regime change for a variety of reasons. And I think many of them did believe that the U.S. and allied forces would be welcomed, with people with palm fronds and thanks and cheers and whatnot. And they were all painfully wrong. I mean, look, we're talking about some of the problems in targeting and how things go. I've been doing this now since 97, right? And you just look at that. I've been involved in the wars in Kosovo, Iraq, Afghanistan, a number of conflicts between the Israelis and Palestinians in Gaza, the war between Israel and Lebanon in was that 2006? Or was it 2008? God, you can't even, these things happen so often now. The 2008 conflict between Russia and Georgia, the Libya conflict with NATO. I mean, it goes on and on. I mean, how many wars can we possibly be fighting in 20 years? And it's just really shocking to me and awful. And now we sit here and we're looking at, Russian forces on the border of Ukraine, and actually even within Ukraine's border, having taken over Crimea and the Donetsk area. And so, it's just this never-ending pain cycle.
Yeah, I recently interviewed Samuel Moyne, whose name you might have heard. He wrote the book Humane. How the United States abandoned peace and reinvented war. And one of the things in his thesis, and quite convincing, I must say, the book is exceptional, is that this, and he actually talks about Human Rights Watch in the book as potentially a side effect of this, this kind of humanizing of war over the past, maybe century, and how we've like you even mentioned, the language of precision weapons or precision strikes is a rather surgical terminology. And as these weapons are becoming more and more precise and more accurate, it becomes a lot easier to wage what he rightly, I think, labels the forever war, because it's far more palatable to sell to the domestic audience, hey, we have these precision weapons, we can hit the window that we want to hit. Um, how do you feel about that? Because, I mean, or how do you feel about that thesis, especially as somebody who has seen all of these conflicts over these, what now, 25 years? What's your thoughts?
Well, I think it's really interesting when you consider the development of the human rights movement worldwide in relation to that.
Yeah.
You look at, for example, a Human Rights Watch, which came about as an organization, dedicated to fighting for human rights in Russia against people who are being held incommunicado, in some prison somewhere in Siberia, or and has grown to be an organization that really started with the war in Afghanistan for the first time for a human rights organization to conduct what they called humanitarian battle damage assessment, going into a conflict zone, researching the actual strikes, researching where it was hit, what weapon hit it, identifying the perpetrator, linking that perpetrator to the strike, and then putting out, very detailed reporting on war crimes. Right. Yeah. And information that then, then supports, war crime investigations by the UN, et cetera. You look at Amnesty International, which began as an organization dedicated to people who are, being held by governments as political prisoners. And now Amnesty International has, for example, Brian Kastner, who is, former military and is, their researcher on the ground who goes into conflict zones and does the same thing that I used to do at Human Rights Watch, digging up bombs and linking it to the targeters. You now have organizations that have become created in the last 20 years, such as Air Wars, which is an organization, an NGO dedicated to determining how, where, and why civilians are harmed in airstrikes and providing that information to militaries so that they can, validate their targets and fight for the victims on the ground and the recognition of those civilians killed. You look at Civilians in Conflict, Civic, which is an organization that was started by a dear friend of mine, Marla Ruzica, who went to Afghanistan in 2001 and recognized that civilians were being harmed, but not being taken care of by militaries. And so in Iraq, then she began creating a system in which amends became something that militaries began to do. And that was a regular thing that pretty much all of the Western militaries do. When someone is harmed, they provide some sort of amends, whether it's, economic compensation or whatnot. So you have an entire human rights movement that has grown from 20 years of war. You have organizations that have changed because of the way that wars are fought. And it's amazing to me that we're living in a world right now where, on the one side, you have militaries going in and fighting, you have human rights organizations that are going in and investigating. And then the two realize, hey, maybe there's a lot of mistrust and whatnot, but if at times we can come together and provide each other some information, whether it's, lessons learned, or you have, you have best practices, we can perhaps minimize the civilian harm. And then, there is the question as raised in the book that you put forth. Does that make wars more palatable? Does it make it easier because now we're having fewer people killed? And so, you have this issue where, people look at, and now we're talking drone strikes, right? Where the strike in Afghanistan, where everyone always thinks, oh, it's so precise, it limits civilian harm, but it's only as good as the intelligence that backs it up. And if you don't know what you're aiming at, then you're going to kill people that, you're going to kill innocents. And it's awful. It's really awful. And I've seen it, and I've worked on the ground for the United Nations conducting war crimes investigations. I've done it in Afghanistan, in Syria, and in Libya. And it's amazing to me, then you shift from a human rights organization, then work for the UN and do the research, link up, and absolutely positively identify, a perpetrator to a civilian casualty issue, put reports out. And then, the Security Council does not only nothing, but they protect the perpetrators. You've got the Russians veto any action that we've got going on for Syria, for example, right? And so it's just a really hard situation where you've got a lot of very dedicated war crime investigators and human rights officers in the UN system and in NGOs, trying to make things better and trying to work with the military. And some are more open to it than others.
And of course, the nature of those conflicts will dictate who potentially is, to be called guilty or not. At this stage, I don't think any Western militaries have been successfully prosecuted for any kind of war crimes internationally, to my knowledge, at least.
No. I mean, you've got some of the internal investigations. You've got, the Operation Burnham from New Zealand. You've got the Brereton Report,
of course,
for Australia. I mean, in the United States, we've had instances of individuals going to jail. You had Clint Lawrence, who killed Afghans. You had the Blackwater guys in Iraq. But then, we then had a U.S. president that pardoned war criminals. So I really don't want to get
actually, Bob, and I mean the whole kind of piece of war crimes is something I discuss quite often in the podcast. I'm very convinced that focusing on individual soldiers or individual acts is almost a misnomer, because the environment shapes what you do, and this is much better than I do. One becomes very desensitized to war. The more war one is exposed to, and some of these soldiers have been deployed beyond what they should have been, and they had been exposed to beyond what human beings should be, and all of these actions led to various incidents, which is not to say that they shouldn't be prosecuted or investigated, but I think we need to realize that the upstream causes of our decisions to go to war is ultimately what we're talking about here, and that's what I think Samuel Moyne's book really touches on, because he's all this focus in international humanitarian law in organizations is the kind of post-HR, post-decision point, we're going to war. But it's this decision to go to war that somehow we don't really explore. Our leaders, our politicians are left off the hook completely. We don't hold them accountable for, just war doctrine, which we also embrace in Western militaries. We certainly don't hold them accountable anywhere, in fact, at all. It's with complete impunity. No one's ever going to drag George Bush into a court and say, hey, what were the reasons that you actually decided to go launch that conflict?
I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, the lack of accountability really reinforces this sense of impunity, and that's a core problem that we see in the human rights community. Yeah,
and I think it's a good point, and I mean, I haven't even gone down half the page of my questions that I really want to get to, and we've nearly been going for an hour. So
please, yeah, no, I'm sorry if I'm going down tangents.
Not at all. I was just going to say it's an amazing conversation, because my eyes are just you're really peeling back the curtains, and I think that's really important. But I really want to touch on how is collateral damage. Collateral damage estimate calculated, right? Because you mentioned at the start, and I know it's changed since, and I really want to get to that. But back in those days, the cutoff was 30 when it had to be bumped up higher to get approval. So just to put that in context, that's 30 civilians, 30 human beings who are in no shape or form involved in the war. That was the high watermark, so to speak, of when it had to be. If 30 or more are going to die, it had to be pushed up higher. So maybe just touch on how you actually worked out the CDE, collateral damage estimate, and how that's now changed. I know that you've done some recent work with Pentagon, but maybe it's timely to address as well.
Yeah. So collateral damage estimation is very much a science. You have engineers who will look at a facility, for example. Look at the building, how it's constructed. What is it constructed of? What is the earth made of? Do you have hard packed earth? Do you have sandy earth? How much glass is in the building? What is the construction like? Where are people in the building in relation to the actual places where the weapons are going to impact? What kind of weapons are you going to use? How large are they? What is the type of fusing? Are you going to set it to explode on contact, or are you going to set it to explode underground? And you make these decisions because they're going to affect how the weapon operates, and then the effects that occur. So, for example, if munition explodes on impact, you're going to have, widespread surface damage.
Yeah.
But you may want that, depending on the effect that you're requiring. But if you explode the weapon underground, subterranean, put a 4 or 8 millisecond, delay on it, then the building is going to basically implode and collapse upon itself. Now, that's going to completely destroy the building and anyone inside. But, the surrounding area, you're very likely to have buildings that are across the street from it that don't even have broken glass.
Right.
So,
like
there are
the
a
maternity hospital example.
Like the maternity hospital, exactly.
Yeah.
And so you have these engineers that look at all of these physical features of the building. They take historical population data to understand where and when people are going to be in an area. And, honestly, for some countries, it's pretty good. And for some, it's not that good. Like I remember when we were working Iraq, the last Iraqi census had been, like a decade or 20 years prior to the conflict. And so you're sitting there going, okay, how useful are these numbers? But at any rate, they'll then do an engineering model of the building. And it's it really is, it's a visual look at it with concentric circles of varying colors from, red to yellow, orange and yellow and out. And you're looking at varying levels of damage, everything from complete and instantaneous destruction to at a certain distance, maybe you have eardrum rupture. And then you're determining at a certain time of day how many people are going to be here. So what are the expected civilian casualties? And we had a very high number. We had 30 during the Iraq conflict for high collateral targets. And just so folks know, we worked those down from the 300 to 30. We eventually provided Bush and Rumsfeld with a list of 30 high collateral targets for Iraq, and 29 of those were struck. One was never struck. It still stands today.
Wow.
But you think of all of those buildings, that's 30 people per building, right? So that's, and then you think about all the different bombs dropped in the conflict, and you're talking about high potential. Now you shift to Afghanistan during the Obama administration, and they changed to a level 0. So there, and for NATO, the idea was if any weapon is going to hit a target, and we believe a single civilian is going to be killed, then that has to go to a higher level of authority for that to be checked off.
Right. Okay.
So it there were dramatic changes in the authorizations that had to happen for targeting. Now, this changed fairly dramatically when President Trump came in. And if you look at civilian casualty issues for Afghanistan, the years that he was president, the numbers are the highest ever recorded as far as civilians killed by airstrikes. But I think that there's a lesson there. So let's just try to understand. So what in my business, what we call civilian harm mitigation. So civilian harm mitigation are the tactics, techniques, and procedures that a military can take to minimize civilian harm. There's a number of things that they can do to reduce the risks. And in Afghanistan, and it was really born by the Afghan war and by NATO in the 2007 to 2008 timeframes. I went to Afghanistan in 2008 after there'd been a number of very high deaths airstrikes where a number of civilians were killed. And I met with NATO and tried to understand why this was happening. And put together a report for Human Rights Watch. And simultaneously, quite interesting, the Department of Defense and NATO was doing the same thing. They were for the first time. And 2008 was really the first time they started to count civilian deaths in Afghanistan, but as far as NATO goes. It was 2008. And so they determined that, so there are a number of things that they were doing that were leading to high civilian casualties. And they began to apply these civilian harm mitigation procedures to drop those down. So just to give you an idea, so in 2008, there were 552 civilians killed in Afghanistan by NATO bombs. They began to implement the changes. By 2010, there were 171 killed.
Mm.
So we had, somewhere of a 60% drop
Yeah.
in civilian casualties from that. And the numbers continued to stay around 100 after that, all throughout the conflict while NATO was there, because they were taking far more precautions than they had ever taken before.
Right.
Then, you have a situation where President Trump comes in, and then in 2019, for example, we have 700 civilians killed by airstrikes, which was the single highest ever, because he removed a lot of those restrictions.
Yeah.
And I think an important lesson here is that these procedures help.
Yeah.
There are things that militaries can do that can minimize civilian harm. They can minimize the number of civilians that are going to be killed. And if you implement those procedures, it will have a positive effect. And if you remove them, you're going to have a negative effect. And so, I think the lesson there is, and at least for PAX, from my organization, the lesson there is to engage with the military and attempt to work with them to make changes is one choice that we have made. Some organizations don't do that. They name and shame, or they fight against the military. But we've decided it's in our interest. It's in the military's interest. It's in in all of our interest to work together towards improving how civilians fare in conflict. And so this is something we've worked with them. And there was a Dutch airstrike in 2014, I believe it was 2015, in Hawija in Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
Single bomb. And, you think about all these thousands of bombs that drop in conflict, how many people die. Single bomb, 70 civilians killed. And
wow.
The amazing thing about that is the long-term effects. And I think that's something that people don't often think about. We say, okay, this number of civilians were killed, but you don't think about, okay, how many breadwinners were killed? And now that family has no income. How many jobs are destroyed because, somebody's workshop is gone. The infrastructure is destroyed. So we don't have water, we don't have sewage. That's going to increase cholera and other potential, long-term effects. You don't have access to healthcare. So, for example, in Hawija, if people need to get dialysis or, cancer care, they need to go all the way to Erbil, which is over an hour away on a good day. And the reality is now you have so many checkpoints, it takes a whole day. So there are all of these long-term effects, and you have displacement. So when a weapon hits, and the effects go far beyond just that civilian death, right? And so we're working with these military. So we've worked with the Dutch military now and pushed them to implement changes, because they have never in their history, put out the kind of detailed reporting on civilian casualties to try to educate the Dutch public on what's being done in their name. Yeah. And we're working with them to try to make change, to implement changes. But perhaps more timely right now is we're working with the U.S. military, with the Pentagon, and there is a consortium of NGOs, and we've been providing DoD with a number of changes that we believe they need to make. Things that everything from actually creating an office in the Pentagon that deals with civilian casualties, because they've never prioritized civilian harm. The U.S. military has never prioritized civilian harm ever. So everything from doing that all the way to more in the weed things about certain changes to collateral damage assessments, changes to how they do amends and whatnot, and using people like myself and others in our organizations that have that experience working in or with the military, so that we can provide them with the granular level of detail that they need for changes. And what I find quite amazing is it was going quite well. So the Pentagon was preparing to put out what's called a DoD, a Department of Defense instruction. Right. And it was going to be the very first policy ever issued on civilian harm and civilian casualties. So, it's quite shocking to me that the U.S. military has never had a military-wide policy on civilian casualties. Yeah. They leave it up to the combatant commands. So CENTCOM, for example, or AFRICOM, they deal with it as they see fit within their own area of responsibility. Okay. But there's no overarching standard. And so we've been working with DOD to create this standard. They finished putting it together, and it was supposed to come out right before the airstrike happened in Kabul. Unfortunately, the policy didn't come. Now, would that policy have made a change and saved those people's lives? I don't know.
We don't know, yeah.
But then they slow rolled it. And I think there was a quite a bit of consternation in the Pentagon about this policy. Is it good enough? I mean, I have not seen it yet. But we've been told that it doesn't necessarily have everything that the NGOs have asked for, which, I mean, I'm not surprised.
It's never going to happen. Yeah.
It never will. But what does it have? And, we've been pushing them to put it out because we said, look, yeah, are we going to complain? Sure. Are we going to say it's not adequate? Probably. But put it out so at least we can see what it does so that it can make changes so that hopefully, whatever conflicts you're fighting right now, people are going to be better protected. And then we can work with you to improve it. I think that's really what's very important here. Let's make those changes. And I think it all comes down to a basic decision. And I remember when I was being interviewed by Ken Roth, who's the executive director at Human Rights Watch. And I was being interviewed by him, and he said to me, something along the lines of, look, Mark, we make a decision. There are two ways to look at international humanitarian law, right? The laws of armed conflict. There is the should we be going to war, and there is the conduct of war. And he said, we leave the should we be going to war to others, and we deal with the conduct of war, the conduct of hostilities. And I really took that on. And I think my career has really been a path of taking on the conduct of hostilities and trying to work with militaries to, improve and make changes in how they conduct operations to improve civilian protection.
Yeah. One question that keeps bugging me is the fact that we actually are able to put a number, regardless. I mean, back in the day it was 30, now it might be 5, it might be whatever, it might be 3. The moral and ethical imperative of that we are quite openly saying that, well, we're quite openly acknowledging that, of course, not all lives are worth the same. Which is something that, is part of our Western narrative is, everybody's voice matters, every person matters. But that really goes against it when we comfortably can say that to kill this high-value target, whoever that might be, we're willing to trade 30 innocents. And I know it's a conundrum because the military can't. I mean, what do you do? I mean, you have to fight a war. But to what extent do you think we're really going to the nth degree to protect those who are innocent, particularly when we're talking about what we mentioned before, where the war machine is rolling, and you have numbers that hey, once I've met this number, it's fine. I can drop a bomb. Once I bring it down to, this many civilians, I can drop the bomb. And it becomes a benchmark. Well, it's a hurdle to jump over to drop a bomb, as opposed to realizing that these are human beings who have absolutely nothing to do with it. They're victims already.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah. I think the first thing we need to do is look at how the international system was created with the Geneva Conventions. States got together and created these, laws of armed conflict, which human rights organizations we call international humanitarian law, and the military calls law of armed conflict, and decided that, hey, killing civilians is legal. It is lawful. And the vast, I've done war crime investigations for a long time, and the vast majority of all the incidents that I've investigated have been lawful. Yeah. It is lawful to kill civilians in war, and I think most people don't realize that. Yeah. All right. It is unlawful to directly target civilians. It is unlawful to purposefully kill civilians. And, there are people who are in prison today because of that. You just had the case in Germany where, using universal jurisdiction, the Germans have successfully put a number of Syrians in prison for doing just those things, for targeting civilians. But, the international community has decided that, yes, killing civilians is lawful, but not directly targeting them. And so you have to go through the steps and see, so in the law, we look at it and say, okay, you have distinction and proportionality, right? So distinction means, I have to target a distinct military object. I can't target a civilian object. And proportionality means that, whatever gain that I get from this attack cannot be outweighed by the civilian harm. Yeah. Right. So civilian harm can't outweigh the
which is highly subjective in itself, right?
Incredibly subjective. And, I give it up to the JAGs, the military lawyers who have to make these decisions. But, the issue of, are we protecting the innocents? I mean, I think the answer is clearly no. Just look at the numbers, look at, every day in Syria, when you have the Russian and Syrian militaries directly targeting hospitals, look at, what the US did in Afghanistan, look at, a myriad number of issues. Have we chosen to protect civilians? No, we haven't. I mean, the United States has never prioritized, civilian protection. And these are the decisions that our policymakers have made and our population support.
Yeah. Just to now maybe pivot to one of the points you've mentioned already, that's drones. And I really I found it interesting you mentioned Obama, that during Obama's time, the rate of civilian casualties dropped to, effectively negligent or zero, or kept at 100, I think you said, throughout the years. But wasn't it also during Obama's time that the use of drones kind of almost exponentially went up? Firstly, I want to confirm if that's the case, but also then how credible can our battle damage estimates be when, we're sending off drones that we don't see and we don't have accurate eyes on the ground to actually confirm those numbers, right? So really, two questions there. First one is the, replacing boots on the ground with drones, yes or no? And then, of course, the accuracy of the battle damage estimates post this, the commencement of drones in no man's land, effectively.
Yeah, so President Obama definitely took up the banner of drone strikes throughout his presidency. And it was, a hallmark of the way that he used the military. This idea that we were going to be, surgical, that you're only going to kill, the quote unquote bad guy, and you're not going to harm civilians, and which is patently false. But it was certainly something, where we saw, drone strikes just picked up exponentially when he was president. One of the problems that you have, as you've mentioned, is that you don't really know what's going on the ground. You're looking through a soda straw from, with a drone. And even if you have, you don't have situational awareness, you don't see what's going on in the area. And this is a huge problem. And it's reinforced by the lack of credible investigations. I look at, and the gold standard for military investigations of airstrikes was really ISAF, was NATO in Afghanistan from that, 2010 up until 2014 when NATO left Afghanistan. And it wasn't perfect. They still had some issues, but they were conducting investigations on the ground, and they were going to sites, trying to better understand, how many civilians were killed in airstrikes, how were they killed, and make improvements, understand what parts of their procedures were not working. I mean, things from, and some of it was incredibly important. So, things like children were being killed in helicopter strikes by U.S. Apaches because they were being seen to dig IEDs into the ground at night. Right. And the reality is they were actually working on irrigation at night, because guess what? During the daytime in Afghanistan, it's super hot and the water is all going to evaporate. But, some, Apache pilot from wherever in the US doesn't know, the reality of life.
Yeah, that's right.
In Afghanistan. Right. And so, but because of these investigations, they learned these things and they started to implement changes. They stopped, those Apache strikes. And that we've really lost that. And we've lost all sense of any investigative capability by the U.S. military and its allies. Wow. We've seen, to the extent where, the French have said, we've never killed a single civilian. They've never killed a single civilian in any of the conflicts that they've been involved in the last years. The United Kingdom only recently admitted to one, which is almost worse. Saying, yes, we've dropped all these thousands of bombs. We've killed only one. And so it's not just the U.S., right? It's the allies as well. But the U.S. takes a lot of the NGO reporting. Well, first of all, I should say that it's been a fight to get them to accept the NGO reporting, right? At first, it was huge pushback, saying,
what
well,
do the huggers want? And
it's not just what tree huggers want. It's more of you don't know all the super secret stuff that we know. And because of that, you don't have a full picture, right? Huh. You don't know how bad these guys are because we're listening to their phones. And our response is, we're in there with these people, right? When I was in the UN, I'm in the villages in Afghanistan, right? You're meeting with witnesses and victims. You're picking through the bomb crater, pulling out pieces of the weapon. You're going to the hospital and getting the paperwork on what happened to them. You're getting the biographical information, and they just weren't doing it, and they continue to refuse to do this. And it got to a point where, for NATO in Afghanistan, they had about a dozen people working in the civilian casualty mitigation cell. All right, so that group that tracks civilian deaths, tries to learn from those deaths, and then feeds back into the NATO system to try to improve things through investigations. Well, those dozen people dropped down to 2 people when the U.S. was conducting war in Iraq, in Syria, and in Afghanistan, and that's just maddening.
Why? I mean, how is this just even to the leadership, to the military hierarchy? How is this even justifiable or make sense? I mean, I have
no idea. They just completely deprioritized any kind of investigations, and it really got kind of pushed off to the side, and it was maddening, absolutely maddening. And NGOs were continuing to put information forward to them, saying, "Look, here's an instance where you killed someone. Here's another instance." And if you look at in the past weeks. Azmat Khan has put out a number of articles in the New York Times, really impressive work, where she got through Freedom of Information Act requests, a number of internal, I should say thousands of internal U.S. strike documents.
Scary.
And and has been able to put together these cases where the U.S. said, no, we weren't even there. We weren't even dropping bombs on that day. And it just goes to show how poor even the record keeping is, which is shocking to me because, we have this impression that, well, the military captures all the data and they know everything that they're doing. And well, if you're going to drop a bomb, of course, you know where you dropped it. And they don't. And now, so they had the civilian casualty group that CENTCOM had a couple people. Then they doubled it. They got up to 7 people after a while, and it's just this constant fight. And now we're working with CENTCOM, we're working with AFRICOM. Both have a very different view on civilian harm and how they want to approach it. But you're working with them, and trying to get them to accept NGO data was a fight. Now they're finally taking it in. The next fight that we're having is very, very often the NGO data is just written off as non-credible. And we don't really get a response. Why? Why was this determined to be a non-credible incident? We're providing you with information on X number of civilians killed, and you're just saying to us non-credible. Well, does that mean the strike didn't happen? You have no records of it. It was only, militants. No civilians were harmed. What is it? And right now we're wrestling with this, and we're really hoping that this new U.S. policy is going to improve the investigative process, because not only is it important for the U.S. to do it, because the U.S. is, well, my country is dropping an awful lot of bombs every day, right? But also because the allies tend to follow what the U.S. does. And so I look to NATO, I look to Australia, I look to, the various U.S. allies, and whatever changes the U.S. makes in its targeting procedures through this new policy that's going to come out is very likely going to, in some way, influence how our allies, deal with civilian harm in the future. And, this is going to have a snowball effect, I would hope, if it's positive,
Yeah. Well, I mean, the leadership and the parameters that are put in place that will create the environment within which these types of operations are conducted is inevitably going to have an impact on the end result. I'm sure you can't talk in much detail about this upcoming policy, but are there any particular points that you can share as to what some of the major changes are that you're trying to implement to the targeting process, to battle damage estimates, and so on?
Sure. So, like I said, we don't know what will be accepted. But some of the high points of the requests that we've put in are things such as an actual office to deal with civilian harm that is at a high enough level within the Pentagon that they can actually make changes. And it's not just some collateral duty for someone who already exists, but to actually create some kind of center that can then conduct the important lessons learned and apply them. Across the military. So that it's not just at some, combatant command somewhere, but that the information gets out in a much wider way. So that's one thing. Another thing, and very importantly, is the investigative process. Is to, and I speak to the military quite often about investigations, and they say, well, Mark, we don't have access. And I say to them, well, there are still ways to conduct investigations, even if you're not physically there. There's this magical device called the telephone, and we can give you lists of victims and witnesses. There's an awful lot of things that you can do. When I've been on UN war crimes commissions where we've had access and gone in on the ground and conducted investigations. And then I was on the Syria commission, and the Syrians refused us access. And so we had to create procedures to conduct our investigations remotely. And we were able to do that. And the reporting has been actually quite good. We'd go to refugee camps, for example, interview people in refugee camps, used satellite imagery, et cetera. So there are a number of ways to conduct investigations remotely. And so this is another ask for the military. Another thing is to create an amends system, which is, a way in which people can receive, whether it's monetary recompense for the harm that's been caused, or if there's some other way,
rebuilding the house or something.
Exactly, rebuilding the house, or perhaps someone lives in an area where like let's say an Al-Shabaab area, right? And if you provide them with funds, potentially Al-Shabaab will steal it from them. So what are other ways that we can provide them with something so that they can move forward with that? So there's that, a reporting system so that civilians can actually provide information to the military directly when harm has occurred, and how do they do that? Creating not only a web portal, but not everybody's got access to the internet in a lot of these countries, but other ways in which they can reach out and provide information. And so you take all of these little snippets, and then also, then I get into the real weeds of things like going in and reforming the collateral damage process so that you actually validate the collateral damage numbers. Because Jesus, if it's 30 and you end up, killing 100 people, your collateral damage estimate is useless. Why even have a collateral damage estimate other than to make yourself feel good about it, right? So there are a number of, there's a real spectrum, everything from the very wide view of creating a center all the way down to the real nuts and bolts things of getting deep into the weeds on collateral damage estimation that we've worked with the U.S. military, and really, we're waiting to see. Word is right now that potentially it could be coming out the last week of January.
Right.
But we're really in a hurry up and wait situation.
Right. Okay. Well, that's optimistic, I guess, that there's movement in it. And I guess one point that's probably important to make. As a military person myself, but someone who's probably motivated by slightly different ideals to many of my compatriots, and that's because I have experienced conflict myself as a child. So I've always joined. I'm as close to a pacifist as one can be while wearing the uniform. And one of my kind of aims is to try and reduce our need and want to go to war. But the military, by and large, is filled with highly principled people and people who no one sets out to commit a war crime. No one's born a war criminal.
Absolutely agree with you 100%. I work with some amazing people in the military, whether it's the JAGs or the operators, the targeters, the intel folks, it doesn't matter. They go through some incredible gymnastics to try to protect civilians. But the problem is they don't know everything. And there is a level of expertise out there that NGOs and others have that we can help to provide them so that they can improve their tactics, techniques, and procedures. But, the reality is, no, they don't go out, they don't, try to go and kill civilians. I mean, unless we're talking about the Syrian military, for example. But, when you're talking about, these Western militaries, their aim is not to kill civilians. But when it does happen, that's when the rubber's got to hit the road. That's when you have to say, okay, stop. What's gone wrong? What do we have to do to change? Was there a law of war violation? If so, prosecute. If not, we have to implement changes. There has to be accountability. And accountability for me is a spectrum. It's a spectrum, everything from taking someone who has committed a law of war violation and prosecuting them and putting them in prison and not having your president, them, which sends the absolute wrong message to everyone in the military. But having that, law of war violator prosecuted all the way, through the spectrum to the lessons learned and different applications and changes that can be made. So there are a wide variety of things that accountability means for me.
Yeah. And I wonder whether that's part of the resistance, I guess. Like you said, this is, when NGO reporting comes in, it's deemed as, non-credible, because oftentimes, undoubtedly, it's going to be, very damning to the actions carried out by that military force. And if there's no way to confirm or deny in any kind of, I don't want to call simple fashion, because it's very difficult to, full stop. So there is no simple confirmation, but it's very easy to disguise it or discard it as biased. You spoke to people in the village who are motivated by financial
so many times. People are liars. They want money. They're going to take advantage of us.
That's right.
And it's really exhausting for me to hear that, because when you sit down with victims and witnesses of war, and you are conducting your investigation and you see the reality of what it is on the ground, these people are not lying. They are suffering.
Yeah. And I think that's a really powerful point, because it is very easy for us to, through our lens of the world that's skewed in its own way, view those people as somehow exploiting the situation. But it's not until you've seen it, until you've been it, until you have spoken to people. And that's why I find your story just incredible, where you had the gentleman whose hands you described, who was digging out his deceased family. These stories are really important, and I think what you're doing, and you're also bringing credibility, because you're speaking from a place of intimate understanding, and I wonder whether, and this is a question, I guess, whether this is part of the way we can actually build these connections between the military and the NGOs, by having people like yourself who've, well, you've been really at the sharp end as the head of targeting. You are now, I hate to use the term, but you're sitting on the other side of the fence. But you're also an ally, right? Because you've walked in both camps. And I wonder if that's a way that you're able to build relationships, close working relationships with your military counterparts. And if this is part of not just you, but this kind of wave of people that are coming in with these types of experiences into NGOs that are coming in with some serious credibility, if this is perhaps one reason why we're seeing the softening of the resistance, or am I just being naive and it's not?
I think you're absolutely right. No, I really do believe you're right. When you look at, for example, most of the people who work in the landmine community, who are working for, let's say, Halo Trust, for example, removing landmines in countries. Most of those people are former military personnel that know very well how to put landmines in, right? So they've learned, landmines are bad things. And so we're going to go and we're going to start removing them, right? So, the whole poacher turned gamekeeper, right? So I very much look at it in much the same way. There's myself at PAX. Amnesty has their person. Human Rights Watch, and all of these NGOs are bringing in people with military experience. You look at ICRC. Right. A lot of the military lawyers there are former military personnel. So it's an invaluable skill to have, but it also gives you credibility, because when you walk in and you sit with the military person, and they look at you, they go, okay, you don't know anything. You're just going to give me your tree hugging bullshit.
Yes.
And the next thing you know, you're speaking their language, and they can't snow you with, some acronym, because you'll throw it right back at them. And,
or security clearances, etc.
And they quickly understand, okay, this person's serious.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the dismantling the stigma around, you just want me to go to jail, because that's a fear. That's and that's something we need to really understand as, it's not something that I guess military talks about maybe sufficiently enough, but about, hey, there's a line that at which point you become liable.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, that's a lot of the war crime investigations I've done. I've provided information to, various UN agencies that then, I mean, some of the work that I did for Syria, was provided by the Syria Commission to the Germans. So, that kind of stuff definitely goes towards prosecutions, without a doubt.
And it's a hard pill to swallow. I mean, because, when we wear the uniform, we are empowered to go and represent the nation, to fight the nation's wars in the nation's interest. But when the mirror's put back in you and say, hey, you can't just, regardless of all the rules that are in place, you have some responsibility to the actions that you carry out. And I think that's an important piece of the puzzle as we unfold.
I just want to make a quick point, and that is that I have seen recently that militaries are now coming to us. It's always been the fact that NGOs and the UN, et cetera, have gone to the militaries and said, oh, you've done wrong. Here's how you need to improve things. Now they're coming to us and they're saying, you've put this report out because your organization was in, Syria or wherever where we don't have access. And we want to learn more about it. We want to know more about what's going on. We'd like access to your personnel, to learn how things could be done better. And so, for example, NATO brought PAX in a few months ago, and we worked with them on civilian harm mitigation work. And, they came to us, and we're starting to see instances where, I mean, just like the American policy, the new DOTI that's coming out, they've asked for input from the NGOs. Now, of course, there is the concern NGOs have where, they're going to just say, yes, we met with the NGOs and they approved our policy, and that's going to rubber stamp it.
There's bias on both sides, right? Yeah.
Both sides. And our response will be, no, when the policy comes out, we will say, it's great that there's a policy. Finally, here's what's right and here's what's wrong. Yeah. And let's work to improve it.
Yeah. That's fantastic. There's one other question that I'm conscious of the time that you've given me, and I'm eternally grateful, because this conversation has just been just incredible. But we've talked about a lot about the impacts of these bombs on the people on the ground, and of course, it's immeasurable. But what about the impact on the operators, on the people who have pulled the trigger, who, dare I say, believed in something that ultimately proved to be wrong? What has your experience been with that? Because I'm sure it's even just your own story about meeting the man, whose family was deleted from this earth, and you were part of the process. Maybe not responsible per se, but you were part of the process. What's your experience been, and what have you seen, and how are people coping with it?
Well, I mean, the military has a very high incidence of suicide, right? And it's a huge problem. So in 2005, a young officer contacted me when I was at Human Rights Watch. And he said, hey, I'm with the 82nd Airborne. I'm stationed in Iraq, and we are torturing Iraqi civilians. And, this was post Abu Ghraib. So it was really saying, hey, Abu Ghraib was not a one-off, right? This is a systemic problem. And I worked with him. We put a report together. I was able to, with colleagues, bring him to Senator John McCain, who's a U.S. politician who was, a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War, very famously was tortured, and has always, during his life, he's now passed, but during his life, he always stood up, against torture. And Senator McCain brought him into his office, and it was very interesting. At that moment, the U.S. Congress was voting on detainee treatment law, and a new torture statute for the U.S. military, and it was not going to pass. And unfortunately, there was an awful lot of opposition. And by bringing this young soldier to the various senators, was able to actually get it. I believe it passed 96 to 4.
Oh wow!
Which is amazing, or something like that. It was high 90s where it actually passed. He then went through some difficult times. He was in Special Forces after 82nd Airborne. He saw quite a lot. He was in Iraq and Afghanistan, did multiple tours, and unfortunately, a few months ago, he was found dead in his bed. And today actually. Today is January 19th. Today would have been his 43rd birthday. So yeah, the scourge of conflict definitely cuts deep, and we've seen it in the U.S. military, and it's a huge problem. So it doesn't just go one way. There's no doubt, and it's not just people who are up front in combat. You're talking about drone operators as well. Because it's not like you're flying an airplane over, you just pickle the bomb, it goes down, and you never see anything. You followed that family for days, right? You kind of get to know them. These guys give these people nicknames, and then they drop a weapon, and then they watch the after effects, and then you're home that night, having dinner with your family. That absolutely has to. Tear you up inside. So yeah, it's a huge issue. So I think the forever wars have been a huge scourge on this country, and I'm very sad to have been part of it from the very beginning. But I'm hopeful that we can put it behind us. But I'm disheartened when I hear policymakers say, "Well, we're not at war anymore." And I look like, wait a second. What's going on in Somalia? What about the support that we're giving to the Saudis in Yemen? What about the, munitions that we're selling around the world? Give me a break. We're not at war anymore. People are dying every day.
And I guess that's I don't want to finish on such a dark note, but it's a really important dark note, because I think it's one that we need to contextualize, and that's part of, I guess, my podcast is to lift the veil on these narratives of war. That hey, firstly, war just happens over there, happens to them, and these people are guilty more often than not, and therefore we're doing the right thing. But when you hear stories of people like yourself who has been there, done that, in the true sense of the word, at the highest levels of the U.S. military might, I think it's quite eye-opening. Maybe my last question for you, given what you know now about bombs, missiles, drones, and everything you've experienced over, the last 25 years, if you were the chief of high-value targeting right now, how would all of these experiences change your approach?
Oh God,
could you even do the job?
That's a hard question. I don't know. Let me answer it this way. I have spent my career now dealing with the combat of hostilities, right? That side of international law that says, this is how wars should be fought. And I'm starting to wonder, should I have focused more on, should we be fighting these wars? And I think that's an important question, and it's time for our policymakers to start really thinking deeply about that. So that we don't go into the conflicts, without our eyes open when we do go in, and perhaps and hopefully have fewer wars in the future.
And I'm so glad that people like you with your background are asking that question, because that's a really important question, and one we should be demanding answers to from our leaders, who, as we said before, send us to war with relative impunity, not relative, but with full impunity. On that note, Marc, I've taken a lot of your time, and I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been an absolutely eye-opening conversation, and I hope that it'll start more conversations in militaries around the world, because these are absolutely important topics that we should be discussing. So really, thank you very much.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. If it weren't for people like you who are getting the word out about this stuff, then people wouldn't be hearing these stories. So thanks very much for what you do.
Absolutely. And I'll be certainly recommending and putting a link to your own podcast along as I put this out.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, the next podcast is going to be about an airstrike in Iraq and how one bomb had effects that lasted for many years. So, we talk about thousands of weapons, but what about that one?
And I'll put a link to that, because this episode will come out after that's released. So I'll put a link to that episode as well in my show notes. Marc, thanks very much. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Be well and have a great day. I'm going to bed.
Enjoy. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Voices of War. And since you got this far, please consider showing your support by liking and reviewing the show wherever you catch your pods. Also, if you're able, please consider showing your support through our Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee page. Links to both are in the show notes. Thank you, and until next time.